Great. Hello, everyone. Welcome again. This is our second event of the Resilience Hub. I know everyone's energy is still quite high, I hope, because it's just the Sunday before it's going to be a busy 2 weeks at COP. We're very excited to be having this event. This is the Latin America and Caribbean Regional Resilience Hub event, hosted by Fundación Avina, who have put in an incredible amount of work engaging regionally at LAC to understand what the regional priorities, solutions, and challenges are, but I think importantly as well is to try and elucidate and bring forward what the community and grassroots level voices have to say at COP27, with a particular focus on lesser heard and underrepresented constituencies. Of course, this is one of the regional resilience hubs. We've had 4 regional resilience hubs in total, including one for Africa, South Asia, and Asia Pacific as well. So we'll be having these capping events, if you will, to anchor those regional discussions into COP27 itself, to amplify it more broadly at COP27 and beyond. So let's jump straight into the event. We have a number of different presentations and speakers here with us today, but to kick us all off, we'll be hearing from Andres Mogro from Avina. I've been working very closely with Andres and the rest of the Avina team over the last several months, and I can tell you that they've put in an incredible amount of work to engage in such a large region that is so rich and diverse, not just in culture, but in ecosystems and what they have to say, etc. So, Andres, over to you to walk us through a brief summary of the results that emerged out of your regional engagement as a part of the LAC Regional Resilience Hub.
Good morning, everyone. I just want to say on behalf of Fundación Avina, we're very happy to be here. As Emil said, this is just a 1-hour event, but it's the result of hundreds of hours of work that our team has put together in the last month around organizing the Resilience Hub in Latin America, identifying what the main or the hot topics that Latin America needs to discuss around resilience, validating that within our teams and within our partners, then identifying under each of those agenda items or issues. I'm speaking negotiator language. Under each of those issues, who can help us lead a regional conversation around it, and then mapping out all of the stakeholders nationally, internationally, locally, regionally that should participate in that dialogue, then discussing methodologies around the dialogue, organizing the dialogue itself, and then everything that went after the organization of the dialogues, including outputs, messages, videos, graphs, images for the dialogue. We're preparing a magazine around the main results of the Latin American Resilience Hub that you'll be able to find in the virtual space of the Resilience Hub Latin America. So it's taken a lot of work, and the presentation that you should begin to see soon includes a summary of what I've been telling you. Next slide, please. So these are the 7 issues that we held regional dialogues around. And what you see around these issues are the partners that we've made alliances with and that have helped us in organizing the Resilience Hub. So we had 1 regional dialogue virtually, of course, around each of these 7 issues. We had 1 on water resources, 1 on ecosystems and nature-based approaches, 1 on family agriculture and rurality, 1 on inputs from Latin America to the global stocktake process, 1 on resilient cities, 1 on climate finance perspectives from local and indigenous peoples. That was organized by GFLAC, and we have GFLAC's founder here next to me, and 1 on local voices that was co-organized by the Voices for Climate Action program in Fundación Avina as well. So all of these dialogues took place between the end or mid-September until the 2nd week of October, and the planning took place since the beginning of August. These dialogues, the main objective of these dialogues was to identify lessons learned, main messages, experiences that Latin America can teach to the world, and help elevate that in the Resilience Hub through the messages that we've been putting out in the social media in Avina's site, that you will see in the Resilience Hub itself in its virtual space, and of course through this event as well. And I want to show you a couple of these messages that we've managed to identify in the dialogues. The first one around local voices in family agriculture and rurality. We had a good conversation in those spaces around ancestral knowledge, and we had cartoonists joining us in the event. And as you can see here, we have a really nice cartoon that we were helped in making around ancestral knowledge. And the main takeaway that we can take from this conversation is that it's much deeper than it seems, and it's very difficult to even summarize in a document, less alone an image, and even less an event. So I won't try to do that now. But we take as main learning that this is one of the main outputs that Latin America can teach to the world around ancestral knowledge. And the second cartoon that I want to show you around the dialogues that we made in Latin America has to do with agriculture and harvest. And we discussed around all the different practices and circumstances that are happening and that are really bringing the harvest and the cultural practices and just how much the harvest can produce different products at an end. And this is a cartoon that really helped us open our eyes to that reality. And you will see that in the documents that we'll put out around the main messages in agriculture. And I'll just leave it at that, just telling you we organized these 7 regional dialogues. It was a great effort to do so. So we want to thank all our partners that helped us organize these dialogues and that have helped us identify these main messages and create this communication product that you'll be seeing throughout the conference. Even in the screens around the Resilience Hub, you'll see part of the results of these dialogues. And I'll come back to tell you about one of the learnings that we had as a cross-cutting issue around finance in a couple of presentations. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Andres. And just to echo again what Andres was talking about is on the virtual platform, if you go through to the exhibition hall, within that you will see that each regional hub has a virtual exhibition booth. All of this incredible content across the 4 regional resilience hubs has been packaged in an interesting and engaging way and can be found in the respective booths. So do invite you to go online and check that out. Of course, it'll also be on the screens here in the Resilience Hub and also on the Resilience Hub website as well. Really, Andres was not joking when he said hundreds of hours, people hours have gone into pulling together all of this and having gone through with them what they've produced. It is incredibly rich information, very nuanced, and this is why these regional resilience hubs are such a crucial component of the broader COP27 resilience hubs in ensuring that not only these regional voices come to COP, but that lesser heard and underrepresented voices are amplified into these spaces. So with that, I would like to call upon Sandra Guzman, who is the founder of the Climate Finance Group of Latin America and the Caribbean, or GFLAC, to give us a brief presentation around climate finance reaching the local level. Certainly something you are going to hear over and over and over again at COP27. We need climate finance to reach the local level. So looking forward to hear what you have to say, Sandra. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Well, first of all, thanks a lot, Andres and the Avina Foundation for the invitation to participate in this event. As my colleagues were saying, GFLAC, I would like to introduce a little bit of the work that we do. GFLAC is an organization, a civil society organization that was founded 10 years ago. And we had, basically, we started asking, where is the money? In Latin America, as you know, it's a region that is extremely vulnerable, but also we have some economies that are also responsible in terms of emissions. So we really wanted to understand where is the money, how the financial flows have been arriving to the region. But not only that, we were also asking what are our governments doing with their own money. So that's why we have been working basically in 3 lines. So the first one is transparency. We have been tracking financial flows that come to our countries, but also we have been working a lot understanding how our governments are allocating resources at the national level, and we do this through the Sustainable Finance Index. Just to give you an example, in Latin America, there are a lot of countries that are still relying a lot in fossil fuels to generate revenues. For instance, Mexico, Ecuador, and what we are trying to say is we have to decouple our economies to these extractive activities and really start promoting new activities to generate revenue. Unfortunately, in our countries, not all the countries are spending a lot of money in sustainable matters. For instance, only Cuba, in the last analysis that we did, out of all the budget that Cuba allocated, 5% was dedicated to climate change. The rest of the countries allocated less than 1% of their public expenditure. We know that there are it's not enough fiscal space, and the problem is that the region is not receiving enough resources at the international level as well. So this is leaving us in a very difficult position with very reduced fiscal space, not enough support for the international community. If you see it at the regional level, only 4 countries receive most of the financial support, for instance, Mexico, Brazil, Colombia, mainly. But this, if you put in context of the vulnerability of the region, we are still behind. What is what we are trying to promote? The first thing that we have been doing is how can we transform the financial sector at the regional level, how to mainstream climate finance in all the operations, and of course, not only mitigation, but also adaptation. Adaptation has been a critical issue, and we don't have enough information about the cost of climate action. So this is one of the elements that we have been analyzing. How can we finance what we don't know how much it costs? So in that sense, one of the elements that we are trying also to work is how can we create better strategies at the national level to mobilize resources and to really leverage not only public but also private resources, but trying to be very careful about not increasing the debt of the countries at the regional level. So just in terms of the activities that we also do, we try to promote a lot of dialogues and a lot of capacity building. Unfortunately, in the region, there are still limited capacities in terms of the involvement, for instance, of the financial sector. The finance ministries are now becoming more and more active in these issues, but there are still a lot of limited capacities at the technical level. So across all activities that we do, this year we celebrated the 3rd Climate Finance Week in Latin America, and the key topic of this week was precisely adaptation. So we collaborated on this because we realized that even though adaptation is a critical element, not many projects are related to adaptation at the regional level. Actually, we were looking for a lot of projects, a lot of initiatives, and most of the work related to climate finance, or most of the allocation, 80% of the allocation of financial flows are still related to mitigation and not so much to adaptation. So we realized that this is a very, very important issue. So what are the 3 critical issues that we identified across all these years, 10 years of work? We see 3 problems. The first one is quantity. It's true that the financial flows are mobilizing. It's true that there is an increase of financial flows around but what we have is not enough. As we were discussing in the context of the Standing Committee, the cost, more or less, the estimated cost to implement the NDCs is 5.8 trillions by 2030. This is more or less 589 billion per year. But just in 2020, the OECD countries transferred to the non-OECD countries 79 billion. This is only 13% of the financial flows that are required to implement the NDCs. This is a problem. It's not enough money. The second problem is the quality. The financial flows are not allocated where are needed, and we are, as I was saying, mainly supporting mitigation actions. Adaptation is not receiving the important attention. In the COP26, there was agreement to doubling adaptation finance. However, we know that that is not enough. We would need at least 10 times more money for adaptation if we would like to balance with mitigation. And the third problem is access. Yes, There is more money, there are more instruments, there are more initiatives around climate finance, but who is accessing to this finance? Are still the same entities, it's still the same organizations, it's still the same governments, and we are not creating innovative ways to access to climate finance, and that's why we are not making any fundamental changes in the ground. So what are the proposals that we have to really transform the financial flows and really start engaging the local communities in all of this? So the first one is we have to create ad hoc windows to all the financial mechanisms. We keep trying mobilizing finance in the exact same way. The GCF works like the World Bank. The the adaptation fund works like the JEF used to work. So we are not innovating, and we need to create new windows. Why? Because not all the countries have the same capacities to access. And more importantly, we have to really start hearing and accessing and providing more access to the local actors. I'm talking about cities, I'm talking about local communities, indigenous communities, women groups, because all the financial mechanisms, they ask us to adapt to their systems, but the financial mechanisms have to adapt also to the needs of the different groups. So that's why we believe that these mechanisms have to change the way that they do things, created new ad hoc windows or new ad hoc mechanisms to access or to facilitate the access to local actors. We have a big problem with language barriers. If we do not tackle that language barriers, it's going to be very difficult to really ensure that we access it in the same way. I'm telling you because as a Mexican, for me it was very difficult to understand the requirements for the GCF, and I used to work in the government, so for us, for the team, was really difficult to understand what were the requirements. And this is something that has to change. And that has to be part of the readiness programs, not only of the GCF, but more financial mechanisms have to be able to translate all these mechanisms and make more easy the access. We understand that a level of institutionalization is needed, yes, but we can facilitate, we can make these mechanisms easier. And of course, we have to create new type of financial mechanisms. This is, not all the financial needs are in billions. When we go to local communities, when we go to specific projects, they are not asking for trillions. They are asking for enough money to cover specific projects. And I'm going to give you an example. In the Amazon, in the Ecuadorian Amazon, there is a project like to improve the monitoring system to understand who is encouraging the legal deforestation. It's a system that costs $20,000. $20,000 is nothing in the context of the financial flows. There are international organizations that charge that for a couple of days of work. So it's how we are going to start prioritizing these small programs that are not necessarily in trillions, but if we really want to create different approaches, we have to create more scale, small and medium scale projects where we can collaborate with public and private schemes at the local level. Adaptation is all about the territorial understanding. And the big opportunity that we identified is also working with multi-sectorial agendas. For instance, how can we put together projects where we are working with biodiversity, climate, adaptation mitigation, and gender? How can we build projects that are multidimensional, help us to really touch different elements, not only mitigation in one side, adaptation in the other side. More integral projects will help us a lot to really transform the vision at the local level. And the last point that I want to make is the big opportunity that we have to do a multi-regional approach. For instance, at the local level, how can we put together different communities, not only in one specific territory, but we have the big opportunity to start working more in the South-South collaboration. For instance, what projects are working, for instance, in the Amazon, in the Ecuadorian Amazon, that can work in different areas in the Amazon, but the same in other territories. Like, how can we build strategies and projects that are more comprehensive, that bring more people together and make that access easier instead of working in silos, in small projects that are not interconnected. So we have been working in all of this because we truly believe that if we do not invest in adaptation and we do not accelerate, the cost and obviously the loss and damages will be higher and higher and higher. And that will even be more expensive than implementing not only mitigation actions, but just to actually survive and really pay for all those losses, it's going to be impossible. So we truly believe, and we really thank this effort, because we think that increasing the finance for resilience, increasing that opportunity at the local level in the ground will be the solely really answer to accelerate the effectiveness of climate finance in the coming months and years. So I would like to leave it there, and very happy to continue the collaboration and the conversation. Thank you.
Really hard-hitting points there, I think. One, around the need for us to innovate the financial mechanisms. We don't want more of the same. New mechanisms and a prioritization of smaller and medium-sized projects that can deliver finance that meaningfully impacts people's lives. We're glad to have Ellen Acioli with us. And so that is our next speaker, who will be reflecting on the local needs to strengthen resilience in Latin America and the Caribbean, and the role of ancestral knowledge. And as you mentioned the cartoon earlier, it is so much deeper, so much richer, and so much more crucial than we can express in words. But Ellen Acioli is the program coordinator of Voices for Climate Action, or VCA, from Brazil, and a representative of the Association of Indigenous Women, Suraras do Topoyof. You'll have to correct me on that. I may have said it completely wrong. But Ellen, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks so much for the space, and thanks so much for the invite. I'm really happy to be here today. And as he said, I'm an indigenous person from a group called Sateré-Maué from Brazil. I live there in Brazil, in the Amazon Pará State, and I'm a co-founder of a indigenous human association called Suraras do Tapajós. We have Instagram page, if you can see there after. And I belong to the Resilience Hub expert review group, and it's really nice because I have been part of the committee analyzing the project that we have received to financing. And I work as a programmatic coordination for Voice for Just Climate Action in Brazil. And we have been a different work when we speak about climate agenda, because climate agenda is far away from who is in the ground. We start to talk about it, about the concepts. Who knows these concepts? Who is in the floor knows this concept? So it's really important to think about it. Because when we start talking about climate change in Brazil, we start talking about polar bear. What is polar bear for us? Doesn't make sense for us, because we don't know polar bear. We don't know iceberg. So how we can engage people if they don't know, if this thing doesn't make sense for them, doesn't belong to their realities. So it's very important we start speaking about it, because it's just about colonization. And our language about climate change is still a colonization way to speak to the people. So I love a lot what you say, because you say all technical things, so I could just explain the another side of the climate agenda for us as indigenous people. And when I start work at Fundação Avina, and when we start implement this program in Brazil, we face a lot of questions to implement this program in Brazil, because there is money to climate change, but the money can't arrive for the people, in the indigenous people. Why? Because we aren't talking their language. We aren't talking what is important for the people there. And you aren't talking about human rights. In Brazil is one of the more important places in the world to face climate crisis. But who is it happening in Brazil? How we work in Brazil? Who is defend the forest? If you protect the forest in Brazil, you are in the same way against combating the climate crisis. And it's important to see, we talk about it because who face climate crisis in the world is the forest stand. The forest stand in Brazil are indigenous land, Afro-descendant lands in protected areas. These people, since ancestral time, they have been in these lands. Keep these lands standing, keep the forest standing. But what's happening now is our rights for these lands is threatened by the government. So we can't speak about climate crisis, face climate crisis, if you don't speak about human rights. Because if these people are defending the forest, if they lose their rights about the land, we can't face it. We can't face climate crisis. So it's, I'm talking about it because, as Sandra said, we segment everything: adaptation, resilience, and mitigation. But there is another way to speak about facing climate crisis. It's not the way the people are discussing in Europe. It's the way the people discussing in the floor, in the Amazon, in another place where there is tropical forest. We need to understand this. For example, another thing is, indigenous people usually don't like when we speak about credit market because they don't understand what we're talking about. And the concept were built far away from us. How we can believe, we can trust in a concept about credit market, and we don't participate in this build. How? We just don't trust because we don't think these standards were built for us, for include us. We think this concept were built, or this standard were built to privilege European market. So we really need to think how make people, indigenous and extractivists and Afro-descendant people that are living into the forest, how we can make them belong to this process. So it's a discussion about the colonization as well, and human rights, and building together, really together. And when I'm talking building together, it's not about making one meeting and listening there. No, it's a process. It's like an organic process, like it is the forest. It takes time, it takes involvement, it takes patience, it takes empathy. So we really need to make some discussion about finance in another way. We need to understand what the sector we have been act to finance climate. traditional people, private sector, government, and you have to have a strategy to speak with one of these groups. If no, we start in the same way, because we won't change a lot if you don't make it like mindset, no? I think it's my main message, and after I can answer some. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ellen, for sharing your thoughts. Just reflecting on the Africa Climate Week that took place in Libreville, Gabon earlier this year, where the Africa Regional Resilience Hub hosted an event. And one of the things that was discussed in that event was the need for communicating these complicated ideas. And an expert science communicator said something in one of those sessions, because there were voices from the ground that were bringing this exact same point up. And this person said there's a difference between simplifying something and explaining complexity. And I think what resonated from that was that, well, we're not saying that people can't understand the complexity. We're just saying that we need to put it in language that people can access. And listening to you speak, Ellen, just made me reflect on that. And that was in Libreville, Gabon. And here we are sitting in Egypt at a Latin America and Caribbean Regional Resilience Hub hearing the same thing. So let's take that message with us. It's not simplification. It's learning how to explain complexity and meeting people with a language that they can access. So on that note, let's shift over to Andres, who will be walking us through a very interesting initiative around how we actually get this finance to the ground. So Andres, over to you.
Before I go into our presentation, I just want to reflect on 3 key messages from what Ellen was saying. The first was a reflection that she shared with us a couple of months ago that really opened my eyes, which you said that sometimes when we go to the ground, we replicate colonists' practices, replicate colonialism within our own communities, within our own peoples. When we go and we tell them, this is what's happening in your community, we know best. This is what you have to do, we know best. So listen to us. It really undermines the roles of local communities in taking the assumptions that we know best about what's happening on the ground, we know best about what they should do. It's a replication of a colonial practice. And when Ellen said this to us a couple of months ago, it really opened my eyes. A second reflection that I want to make, and that's also been part of the learning process in the initiative that I'm about to tell you, is the linkage between climate change impacts on the ground and human rights. And this is also something that hasn't been discussed, and it's never discussed in mitigation and adaptation indicators and MRV. That human rights just don't go into the discussion. If you think about actual impacts of climate change on the ground, climate change is threatening the rights of health, water, housing, adequate jobs, social participation, like in these spaces, for instance, free speech, peaceful association. I mean, there are basically all human rights are being threatened by climate change. And this is not a reflection that we do, at least is never done at the level of funds or funding a climate solution. And a third reflection and a message that Ellen also said in her presentation, we need finance in another way. So with that introduction, I want to tell you about an initiative that we've been promoting, that we've been working on in Fundación Avina. And I have this control, so I'm not going to ask for next. So apparently at the international level, there are resources, not enough, not as adequate as we would like, but it doesn't reach local communities. Particularly, I would say, when the entire finance discussion is now focusing on the private sector, you will have noticed this, but 99.7% of finance coming from the private sector focuses on mitigation only and doesn't reach local communities. And you'll see here a lot of data that I will run through with you, so there's no need to read and not pay attention to the presentation. BASE is a task force that we've been creating with Avina, with partners and associated initiatives. Its objective is to promote better access to climate finance for local communities, while simplifying at the same way ways to develop a climate rationale and demonstrating the impacts of solutions of adaptation and mitigation on the ground. This, in a consultation process that I'll tell you about in a second, has been the main message, the main takeaway that we've gathered. That the whole development of a climate rationale, regardless of the availability of funds, the whole development of a climate rationale becomes an obstacle to access climate finance by local communities. So some of the context and challenges of BASE. As you all know, internationally, there's a target to mobilize 100 billion per year to developing countries, and it may sound like a lot, but even at the accounting game that is being played to fulfill that commitment, it hasn't, and it's been reported as one of the big failures of the climate regime. But even at that, when you look at those numbers, the vast majority of what's being dispersed consists of loans, so that's debt generation, indebtedness for local communities, and out of that, around 90% is focused on mitigation rather than adaptation, which of course contradicts local needs. Less than 10% of funding committed on the International Climate Fund is directed at the local level. And as Ellen also said, local communities are at the front line of the impacts of climate change, but have also had a very important role in promoting conservation of biodiversity, of flora and fauna, and of local territories. There are numerous obstacles to accessing climate finance. One of this, as I was mentioning, is ensuring that the project responds to problems related to climate change, what we in the climate world call the climate rationale. Well, developing a climate rationale for a project includes in itself technical capacities, access to information, to very technical information, including climate projections on temperature, on precipitation, on impacts, sometimes developing risk assessments, which can be very, very costly, and funds in itself. Just to come up with a project that needs finance, you need to have finance already. And even at the international level, if you look at the commitments that we have, the provision of resources is conditioned to mitigation action. So it doesn't matter if you need resources for adaptation, you need to be doing mitigation to get resources for adaptation. So it's a little contradictory what you can see at the international level. And developing a rationale for traditional funds, what we have called traditional funds, is time-consuming, involves a robust climate data, technical capacities, and resources in itself. So with this context in mind, we've worked in BASE, the initiative. And BASE, as I was telling you, is meant as a task force. We don't like to think of BASE as a fund, more of a task force that has been developed collaboratively with partners and associated initiatives, all of the logos that you see there behind Sandra's hair. These are the partners of BASE, and these are the partners with whom we've generated a consultation process to identify these lessons learned and these challenges around accessing climate finance. And what we've come up with is a proof of concept that hopefully will help impact the way climate finance is reached in the local level. How are we going to do that? So we're going to do that basically with calls for proposals. So we will issue calls for proposals for local communities, and we'll try and use different requirements than those of traditional funds, particularly on the climate rationale side of things. The way we plan to do this is by linking local action with global information on climate change. If you look at the latest reports of the IPCC, for instance, the IPCC will tell you the types of impacts that are happening on South America, for instance. And even at a country level, you will have information on what's happening on South America. You'll have evidence, projections, and around those impacts, you will have suggested actions that need to be taken. So it doesn't make sense, it duplicates the effort to ask of each initiative that is meant around those actions to tackle those impacts to again prove its climate rationality. This is what's happening in the traditional world of climate finance. And what we plan to do is to simplify these requirements, so we don't plan on going as deep on the climate rationality of things, but more focusing on the impacts and the roles of local stakeholders in implementing these actions. And we'll do a first call of proposals, do a session of lesson learning with our stakeholders and our partners around what's happened, how projects are doing, what we have learned from those projects themselves, their implementation, do a second round of proposals and repeat, and do a third round for proposals and repeat. And by then, our funds will probably have been depleted. So before we're even launching this first round of proposals, we're looking for additional funds to try and replicate this. But the largest value added, the most valuable lesson that we plan from these processes are the lessons learned around how the simplification of the climate rationale for local stakeholders is working. What types of monitoring arrangements are we identifying? What types of indicators are we finding more useful for local communities in lines with capacities, in lines with governance, local governance arrangements, and try and bring all of that learning and all of those lessons learned to the global conversation around climate finance, and hopefully incite, generate a reflection with the international or the largest funds. To let them know that there's a different way of doing things, there's a different way of funding proposals with local communities. This is something that hopefully will stray away from what we usually in the climate world call business as usual and become a business unusual and be more useful for local communities. So what comes next? Forbase, as I've more or less already said, from July to November, we've consolidated a base for stakeholders and partners and associated initiatives for BASE. In October, we held the first plenary with our partners to tell them about what we were planning, hoping to do. And from August to October, we held a consultative process with local stakeholders in not just the region, but the global south. So a consultative process that took place in 3 workshops with 94 participants, 27 interviewees. We did a lot of literature review around what's happening in international or traditional climate finance. And we're coming up with lessons learned that we plan to apply in the first call of proposals. We will be officially launching BASE in this COP on an event that we have on the 10th. So you can be looking at your schedules in the COP for that event, and we will have a press conference around BASE again on the 11th. And the announcement for the first call of proposals and grants is planned to be shared by February 2023. And after that, we'll work on designing and polishing and redesigning the TORs for the calls for proposals, and hopefully come up with a set of lessons learned that will be useful for the international climate regime in general. And I'll leave you with that, just with a QR code for additional information around BASE if you would like to access it, and be happy to engage with anyone who's interested about this initiative. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Andres. I think all of you can agree that this is where the rubber hits the road. Are we able to innovate, whether it be at a regional level, whether it be at multilateral fund level, to get the resources to the ground, as Andres said, is to be more useful to local communities. We've heard a lot during this session, but we do have a brief minute or two to take a question from the audience. If anybody, could we get the gentleman a microphone? Thank you, Karen. Please go ahead, sir.
I would like to, in Spanish or Portuñol, but the official language is English, no? Well, I'm Pablo Ferrer from the Gran Chaco region. It's the second forest after Amazonia and the forgotten forest. And we have the same problems, And, well, the question is two things. First of all, well, Fundación Avina is working with us for a long time, around 20 years, supporting Redes Chaco. It's the platform I'm part of. And we are talking with Avina, and we have to go with this idea is something that we name entre biomas, among biomas, between biomas. You have to work with Amazonia, Chaco, Pantanal, all the regions. And this point, I think that BASE is an opportunity to talk in it. So the geographic area of BASE is all Latin America, all South America, what's only Amazonia, please. I think that we have one goal of this meeting is that we talk then and how we work together, Chaco, Amazonia, and the other biomas in this idea, because we have the same problems, and this could be some solutions. The national, I don't know how to say, PNUD program, have the small grants projects that could be part of these small grants focused. We are discussing with the European Union the 7 million euros for the Chaco region, and after 2 years talking, no? So that's why it's difficult, but we can learn together. So instead of a question, it's a question but a proposal. So thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Would one of you like to respond? Go ahead, Andres.
Yes, thank you very much for that question. I'm very happy to hear that Avina has been working with you for a long time. So to respond to that question, in practice, how the calls for proposals are going to come out is through the associated partners of BASE that you saw in the PowerPoint presentation. I don't know, can we maybe bring back that PowerPoint presentation, the base PowerPoint presentation that I made? So in the third slide, there was a series of partners. So the calls for proposals won't be an open full call for proposals for anyone in all of the world to send their concepts, but for the partners and the local communities that are already working with these partners and associations, they will have the possibility to respond to that call for proposals. So we will issue the call for proposals through them, and they will in themselves issue it through the local communities that they work with. So it's kind of an open call of proposals, but with the local communities already working with these partners, at least in the first exercise. And we'll again discuss with all of the committee in BASE how we do the second one. It might be, and we'll see, for instance, the regional balance of BASE, how the first set of proposals is going around which issues in which countries, and try and make sure that it doesn't get monopolized by a specific topic or a specific region. So the second one might be focused on a second thing, the third might be focused on a second thing, on a third thing. So it's still a learning procedure, but we've agreed with our partners that the first call proposals will be handled that way. So they'll be the ones to replicate it with local communities that they work with. I hope that responds to the question.
So thank you.
Gracias.
Of course. Great, thanks so much. We are out of time, but would you like, Ellen, go ahead.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, of course, go ahead, Ellen.
In Brazil, for this program that I have been coordinating, VCA, Voice for Just Climate Action, and we have been making many activities together, Amazonia and Chaco, and you pretend escalonate for another projects. So we are in this way as well for now.
Great, thank you so much. And with that, colleagues, we draw this session to a close. Thank you to our speakers, and a special thank you as well to Fundación Avina for all of their work, as well as the work of all of their partners in pulling together the LAC Regional Resilience Hub. We look forward to engaging you throughout the week, and please do continue the conversation outside of this event and throughout the rest of the Resilience Hub. Thank you.
Thank you.